So I'm Susan Blunt. Thanks so much for everybody coming out tonight. It's great to see you all. I'm one of the co-directors of Neighbors on Call. Becca Zirkin, my co-director and also a founder of Neighbors on Call, is here too. We are very pleased to have an excellent speaker tonight who was actually just talking to us just now, but excellent speaker tonight, Professor Nancy MacLean, and so grateful that she could join us.
Oh, it's a crap.
Now that the primaries are finally over, it feels like this is really a pivotal moment all to sort of take stock of where we are and what do we need to be doing right now. There are a lot of you who worked really hard for the candidates or at the polls for this primary, and many, many thanks to you for that. And you know, there were some tough races with some strong feelings, and some of you may be feeling a little bruised or sad or disappointed, and others are elated. So what's important now is that we unite around our shared purpose, fighting back against far right forces, which means electing Democrats. This group, Neighbors on Call, or NOC, as we like to call ourselves, is an all-volunteer organization focused on electing Democrats to the North Carolina State Legislature. Now, you may be wondering, with so many other races that will be happening this fall, like the U.S. Senate, Congress, and the judges, why are we focusing on the North Carolina legislature? Now, what you need to do is look back and see that before 2018, the Republicans held a supermajority in the state legislature, and Becca's got a slide she's going to put up in a second. That meant our governor's veto was powerless when the Republicans held a supermajority. But with so much on the line, we cannot let them regain that stranglehold that was broken in 2018. North Carolina Republicans are eager to restrict voting rights and abortion access, if that isn't clear now, and loosen up gun access. Bills for these things have already been drafted and they're waiting for the opportunity. So here's where we stand right now. Republicans are only 2 seats short of a supermajority in the state Senate, 2 seats, and 3 short in the state House. So what is Neighbors on Call's plan? As always, we'll continue to have our focus on electing Democrats to the state legislature by talking to voters at their doors and on the phone. We focus only on a few districts where the races are very close. And since most of NOC's canvassers live here in the greater Triangle area, right now our canvasses are for races that are nearby, where we can be most impactful as a group. So here are the 3 incumbents we must re-elect in November. First of all, Representative Ricky Hurtado in Alamance County. He won last time by 477 votes. Then there's Senator Sidney Batch, who's in southern Wake County. And then there is Representative Terrence Everett in the northeastern part of Wake County. And we're pleased tonight to announce that we're adding a new candidate to our slate. Mary Wills Bodie is running to flip a state Senate seat in Wake and Granville County. And it so happens that Representative Everett's House district lies totally within Mary Wills' Senate district. And so these 2 candidates are collaborating. That means your volunteership will have double the impact, 2 for 1, we might be saying. We also have one special canvass coming up with Representative Reeves in June. Becca will tell you a lot more about that later. He's as you know, the Democratic leader of the North Carolina House and a great guy. Now, within those districts, we will be talking to a targeted segment of voters. The campaigns generally have us speak to the left-leaning voters who don't always actually go to vote. And we are working on a big event in June for you all to meet these folks. Stay tuned for the details. As soon as we firm them up, we will be letting you know for sure. And hopefully that's real soon. These legislative seats that I mentioned before will be won or lost by tiny margins. Your work in these districts could swing an election. It has in the past. It does work. So now I'm going to pass the microphone to Becca Zirkin, who will pick it up from here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We're so pleased to welcome Nancy MacLean tonight, the William H. Chafee, and Nancy, I keep meaning to check if it's Chafee or Chafe, and I apologize. Distinguished Professor of History and Public Policy at Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy. At Duke, Professor MacLean teaches courses on 20th century America with a focus on social movements and politics, which is exactly what we all want to hear about. Her 2017 book, Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America, was a New York Times bestseller and a finalist for the National Book Award in nonfiction. She recently appeared on Joy Reid's show on MSNBC and on Jimmy Kimmel Live. And if you'd like to see her in person, she will be at the Century Center in Carrboro this Sunday at 3 p.m. with the Orange County Dems and County to County. And I believe Judith is going to put more information about that in the chat for anyone who's interested. We are very proud that this is the third time that Professor MacLean has come to speak with our group, and even prouder that she is a NOC volunteer. So thank you for phone banking with us, Professor MacLean, and welcome.
It is such a pleasure to be with you. And thank you for that lovely introduction, Becca. And Susan, thank you for such an informative overview, bringing people into this work who are new and recharging the batteries of those who have been doing it for some time. I just have to tell you, you are one of my favorite volunteer groups in the country. I love to see this turnout. This is fantastic, 95 people. It makes me really confident about the way forward in 2022. So we have lots to talk about, and we certainly have big obstacles ahead, but it's just wonderful to be with such a group of motivated volunteers.
Thank you. And I see the correction you put in the chat. Thank you for saying that. It's Bill Maher, not Jimmy Kimmel. Sorry. Apologies. Well, thank you. And we're truly honored that you feel that way about Neighbors on Call. And we want to spend tonight somewhat talking about like what happened and how we got here. I think we're all feeling scared. That we were talking about that in the chit chat time before the event started. But also we really want to talk about what we need to do and where the hope is and what the path is going forward, because we do really need to put this fear and anger into something that could actually make a difference. And there is a way to do that. So, my job's not starting. So thank you for being here. And so let's just get it started with how did we get here and what's the end game? What does mission accomplished look like for the Republicans?
Yeah, well, we could do the long version of how did we get here that might start in the 1970s. And I won't say that much about it, but I think it's worth just looking back a little bit, because while folks on our side were doing wonderful things like having just, gotten the Civil Rights Act passed and the Voting Rights Act passed and getting women included in protections from employment discrimination and launching an LGBTQ movement and environmental protection and all of this good stuff, what we didn't realize is that others were not happy with those developments and were mobilizing on the right. And particularly dirty corporations, we can see now more clearly in hindsight, fossil fuel corporations, tobacco corporations who were facing regulations, gun manufacturers, were really the heart of pushing forward on the right. My own research is about the Coke network, and of course, Coke Industries is based in fossil fuel. And essentially they realized that they were never going to get a majority the honest way. And that was certainly true by 2010. And I'll just jump up to the short story. So they started figuring out other ways to gain power and to make the country work in the way that they wanted it to work, rather than the way the majority of us wanted to make it work. And so they started mobilizing in earnest with a very smart strategy to focus on the states where we were not focused until really 2018 in a big way. They got really significant control at the state level. And as I don't probably have to tell people here, use that control at the state level to do things like the most radical gerrymandering we've ever seen in American political history, to misrepresent the electorate, voter suppression, taking away workers' rights, now taking away women's reproductive health rights, and so much more. So it has been, there's a long and a deep strategy, then an acceleration after 2010. And in terms of what the end game will be, here I want to be a little bit careful, because I do still hold out hope for at least some of the 30% of Republicans who don't believe the big lie. The rank rank and file voters, you know, I don't think that they should be the primary focus. I think your focus is perfect on the infrequent but very democratic voters. But so there are clearly Republicans who are scratching their heads wondering what happened to their party. But at the top level, the donors, the radical right donors like the Kochs, are pushing for a society that we would find unrecognizable. I mean, they want to do things like privatize public schools, privatize Social Security and Medicare, get rid of our national parks, essentially turn them over to ranchers in the states. Just so many more things than we could name. Ultimately, change the Constitution. So really, really scary stuff. And in the course of all of this, what they did to our political system with so much disinformation, relying on Fox News, 24/7 and so forth, is really stir up the most frightening, ugly parts of some American psyches, as we just saw in Buffalo too, right? Most horrifically and dramatically. But we saw all of that flow into the election of Donald Trump and then the popularity of Donald Trump. So the Republican Party is all but transformed from that. I mean, my father voted Republican for much of his life, and he would not, he died in 2000. He wouldn't recognize this party now. And I think many of us know people who feel that way. So we don't even have to guess what they would do, even in the near term, because Rick Scott has given us his program, and it's the only program the Republicans have now. So I urge people, if they haven't seen it, to look that up, because it's quite the motivator. And we certainly know that folks on the right have not been satisfied with the prospect to an end of Roe versus Wade. They're also now excited at the prospect of ending contraception, anything that would, for the folks who believe that a fertilized egg is life, they would roll it back to exclude much of the contraception we rely on. And of course, by the doctrines that Justice Alito laid out, marriage equality would be vulnerable as well. So these are really, really serious times and really serious challenges. But I'm also encouraged and really heartened by the number of people like yourself around the country who don't get a ton of media attention, perhaps, but who are really understand the scale of the threat and the necessity to mobilize, not just to defend what was won in the past, but to break through all of this so that we can get the things that we need for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren in the 21st century. Oh no. Oh, you're on mute, Becca. I thought it was my hearing.
Sorry. I know I've asked you a version of this question in the past, and I'm always churning it over and thinking through your lens when things, always. Why? But I mean, it like, what's the driving factor behind the Koch money and the people who are now driving the bus of the Republican Party? Is it about abortion? Is it about racism? Is it just about money and resources and not sharing that through taxes?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say is they have built a very effective coalition and made sure that different partners to that coalition are rewarded in policy terms. So I don't think we can identify a single element, but I would actually say for the Koch network and the libertarian economic liberty driven right, they oppose the whole model of 20th century governance in this country. And actually, we could say before that, because they have a mythical version of earlier American history, but they don't want an inclusive, robust democracy in which the majority of the people can identify what we see as the common good and proceed to enact that into policy. One of the most threatening things for them actually was the environmental movement, which poses ultimately an existential threat. It's true, to the fossil fuel industry, right? And the fossil fuel sector. And I think that they look at that for the likes of the Kochs and Exxon and others as, an existential threat to their profit source. They have gazillions of sunk, dollars of sunken capital in that industry. They expect profits, and they have shown that they will do anything in order to keep that going. And we see that with the levels of disinformation that they've promoted, the support for the Republican officials who promoted the big lie and who encouraged the January 6th insurrection. So, so for them, I really think, it's all about hobbling democracy in order to get their way. I think that there are other rank and file, anti-abortion folks who come to this from an evangelical Christian lens, even a Christian, dominionist lens, which wants to say that the United States should be a religious country, their particular strain of religion. And the other groups of voters they depend on may have slightly different emphases, but really it's the donors who are driving this train. And it's the donors who have been unleashed since the Citizens United decision, which they all worked for and just made worse with the most recent Supreme Court decision written by Justice Roberts, allowing new forms of campaign finance corruption. So yeah, that's kind of where we are, I think. I think did we lose Becca?
Becca. Becca. That's disturbing.
Well,
Becca.
let me take it up before while she gets back on. I think the natural question that flows from all of this is, what are we going to do about it? And here I just want to say, we lost so much power, and I say we being not just progressives or liberals, but essentially the vast majority of America, like people who believe in empirical reality and think we might owe something to our neighbors and our communities, and public libraries and schools might be a good thing. But we lost so much we had incredible visions, but we didn't think in terms of defense of all of those things that we were winning. And where we really, really significantly lost power was at the state level. And that happened with the way that the right kind of weaponized the racist discomfort with our first African-American president, and mobilized in a big way politically to get control of so many state governments, because while a lot of folks on our side were just thinking, hey, who's the next president and what's going to happen at the national level, we weren't thinking of how much goes on at the state level, that it's where most of the money and the jobs are. It decides what's going to happen in our education, our schools, our prison policies, all those kinds of things. And of course, states decide how elections are run, and who gets to vote, and how elections will be administered, and where there'll be polling places, and all those kinds of things. So they were ahead of us on that, in focusing on the state level. But I think we've woken up very quickly. And one of the things that's been really encouraging to me since 2016 is seeing how many on the progressive side have really, like you all came together after that, right? Have really recognized that we need to act, we need to stop this, we need to reclaim state governments as well as national, and are doing that in an effective way. And I kind of want to say something too, because I think, in the wake of the coronavirus and the war in the Ukraine, and, so many things going on now, I think a lot of people are feeling dispirited. And, I confess that I have my bad days too, but I think here we need to take a long view, because some really incredible changes have been made at the state level through mobilizations like yours. So look at California. California was once the state of Ronald Reagan, of a very empowered, political right, very conservative. And there were folks in that state, particularly people in the labor and immigrant and feminist communities, who said, we can't let this go on, right? And they mobilized quite effectively so that California is now one of the bluest states in the country. Well, we've also seen processes like that happen in the South. So, we forget this, but in 2018, first of all, there was the biggest mobilization in a midterm in our modern history, since the numbers were counted. I believe it was at least 10 million new or irregular voters, participating in a midterm election. And after that, Virginia, with its weird off-year elections, but they won, they closed the gap in a single cycle in Virginia through years of, building up of grassroots effort. And so they won back the legislature. Now, of course, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. They lost the governorship recently, but again, that's off-year election in a pandemic. You shouldn't be over interpreted. And then Georgia, this one of the awful things about January 6th is we didn't get time to savor the incredible victory of Senators Ralph Warnock and John Ossoff in Georgia. Who would have guessed it, that Georgia would go for Joe Biden, and not just go for Joe Biden, but bring us 2 amazing new Democratic senators. And as I believe it was Susan earlier mentioned, North Carolina, we know that we have to have a 10 or 15-year plan, but that plan is on track and started with taking away the supermajority of the Republicans and also getting Governor Cooper elected. So I think we have to really pace ourselves and talk to the friends and others that we talk to who do engage in, doom scrolling on their phones and endless reading of political news without doing anything about it, and remind people this is a long-term project. We know what we're up against, but we can do this. And so I'll just say that. I wonder is Becca back with us?
I'm back. My power flickered and I was gone. So
no worries.
Thank you for carrying on. Well, you answered some of what I was going to ask next, which is basically, is there hope? Have we passed the tipping point? I certainly hoped that you would say there is hope, and no, we are not past the tipping point, and that's what I heard you say.
Absolutely.
And you've talked a lot about the state legislature. We've talked about the specific state legislative districts that we're working in and why. And you also mentioned how regular people, well, you mentioned an example of California, what happened there. And in your study of social movements, what do you see of regular people actually being able to make the kind of change, to leverage the kind of power and energy to stabilize democracy? Like, has it been done? Give us some.
Absolutely. I mean, I teach courses on the history of social movements in the US, and there's almost no significant change in our country, beginning with the revolution, and it's becoming a country that wasn't initiated by social movement activism. So certainly, abolition, the end of slavery, the Reconstruction Amendments, women's suffrage, workers getting rights, the civil rights movement, environmental action, all of these things were driven by groups of citizens. And I have to say, the numbers here, I'm so impressed. 98 people on this call the day after the primary is really, really impressive. And also, I heard in the news on the way home that primary voting was up this year. I mean, not, it could still be a lot better. I think it's about a fifth of the electorate, but I think it was up. I didn't quite catch it, but by at least, a few percentage points. So I do think that there's the energy here. There's the hunger. I think a lot of people understand, particularly since the events of January 6th, that national democracy is under threat, that the Republican Party has turned against the democracy and against the Constitution. We will also see the House Select Committee hearings on January 6th beginning in June. I believe the first one is going to be June 9th. So you might mark your calendars for that and help draw attention to these hearings. I think there's going to be 8 in June. But all of that, too, the way that we can act on that is back home where we live, right? And so you're asking, Becca, what can ordinary people do? do what you're doing here, right? Canvas, get out, talk to the neighbors, meet people in communities, listen. We need to do a lot of listening to hear what's topmost on people's minds, what their concerns are, how we can relate, what our candidates are trying to achieve in the General Assembly to what people are feeling. But this is how it's done, and the relationships that are built through this too. So earlier, before all the people got on, there was talk of a dinner. I don't know how you'd manage a dinner with 100 people, but I suggested a picnic, which I had just done with some other people. And I will say, studying social movements, one of the joys of them and one of the things that keeps people together is the camaraderie, meeting people who share your values, probably share your sense of humor to some degree at least, who care about the same things. That's tremendously invigorating. It builds stronger ties in neighborhoods. It helps all of the things we care about, from our schools to our parks to our, quality of life for all our neighbors. So it's really an enriching process. And it begins with things like, it's crucial to do things like canvassing. I'm not a big, I do make phone calls, but they're not my favorite. But you have, I saw her before and I don't see her now. And I forgot her name, but she was wonderful once, did it take a
Isabel.
Oh, it was Isabel, yeah.
Yeah, Isabel, the person who loves phone banking, can teach you how to love or at least tolerate phone banking. But anyway, all of these things are really important, and also are important are things like, if you hear a story on the radio and you feel like they're really missing something crucial, or they're misrepresenting what's going on, or they're not looking at the achievements, say, of the current administration in ways that are leading to people feeling, the kind of despair that's out there in some quarters, call the radio station, write a letter to the editor, get in touch with people in your community or your congregation. There's just so many ways, I think, to be heard and to connect with other people, to give them the information that they need and the encouragement that they need to become part of the change we all want to see.
I appreciate a lot of the things that you just said, and particularly just want to return to what you said about camaraderie, because that is something we have been so purposeful about with Neighbors on Call from the beginning, and it's certainly been harder during the pandemic, but we have certainly seen that bear out, that it makes such a difference when you're not just one person alone. Nobody knows if you show up or if you don't. We're all accountable to each other, and me canvassing by myself and talking to a handful of people does not feel like a powerful thing. But me being one of 100 canvassers, which is what we have right now, we have 100 canvassers out there doing stuff on the weekends, not, over the course of months. I know my doors contribute to the whole, and we're all doing something really big together. And so I just want to thank you for saying the camaraderie, because that's something that really means a lot to us. And we build a lot of processes in to make it really deliberate, so it can't get passed over. Like when you go to a canvas, there's an assigned point person whose job it is to say, "Hi, Nancy, so glad you're here," and introduce themselves like that. We have all these built-in things.
Great.
So you also mentioned that you're good with the phone banking. And we have a plant in the audience who is your friend, Claudia, and your colleague. And she has canvassed quite a bit. And Claudia, I know you're out there, going to talk to us about her experience with it, and acknowledge that, it is uncomfortable too.
Great.
Okay, am I on?
You're
Yes.
on.
Okay, then with all due respect to Isabel and phone banking, let me answer your question, Becca. You just asked, is there hope? And Nancy answered, there's 98 of us here. I want everybody listening in now on this call to get out and try canvassing person to person. I have to say, I was terrified to canvass. The thought of knocking on the door and being rejected, even a dial tone was better than that. But here's the thing, people who answer the door are polite. You ring the bell, and if they're not home, you leave a very nice, colorful leaflet instead of a phone message. You ring the bell, you step back, you smile, if you have a mask, you pull down your mask, you smile, you say, "Hi, I'm Claudia." Your partner says, "Hi, and then you have a script, just like you do phone banking. We only knock on Democratic doors.
Mm.
If occasionally a grumpy Republican answers and won't tell us how to reach the person who lives there, just let your democracy ooze out and say, oh, I hope you have a wonderful day, sir. You don't try to convince them. So, and then you, between houses, instead of waiting for the software to connect you with your next call and wondering what's going to happen, you walk in pairs with somebody you probably don't know before, but with whom you share a lot of values.
Mhm.
And even if you don't have a Fitbit to tell you, at the end of the day, you know, your body knows you have gotten a good afternoon walk. And you've probably met a new person. So I want to just say, I learned so much partnering. And so here's the thing, that a lot of times people who answer the doors, I think may not know as much in low income neighborhoods. They may not be as sophisticated politically. And here I learned so much from Jan Parker a couple of canvases ago for Ricky Hurtado, that what I listened to Jan as she would move their concern questions like, oh, are we going to send Ricky to Washington? Or their biggest concern was the price of gasoline, to pull them back from that and do basic education, civics 101. To talk to them about democratic values and to talk to them about how local elections, every vote counts more than in bigger ones. And so the other thing is, I love getting to know the candidates in person, hanging out with them around the table before and after canvassing. It's just great. So when you're telling somebody what Ricky stands for, you can hear what Ricky said. And so you don't have to memorize what they said in their work. So I'm just saying, I want everybody here to try it once. And here's the thing. You're really scared. You think, oh my God, should I do this? But there's this wonderful plan. It's called, you can be a silent partner. In other words, as much as you want, you can go and be the second person. All you have to say is what your name is at the beginning. And then you just listen to the more experienced person. You think, can I do this? Can I not? And so you have a chance to decide. And I want to say what hooks me is you never know what kind of neighborhood you're going to end up canvassing in. It's always a surprise, but you see where people live, unlike phone banking. And this is really important. And so in conclusion, I would like to say, hey, Nancy, anytime you want a silent partner with me, just call me up and let's do it.
That's a great idea. Always love to spend time with you, Claudia. That will be fun.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for that. And I want to add a couple things onto what Claudia said. One is just a little asterisk next to, we only talk to Democrats, which is sometimes they're unaffiliated. And so, you know, some of it is sorting out data for the campaign. So they may not know really where this person leans, but they have a reason to believe that they lean left. But sometimes that's a thing we're kind of teasing out if we can. And in my experience, it's pretty universal in every neighborhood of every socioeconomic type that people are not familiar with their state legislature and with their state legislator, and that just knowing their name and seeing you smile and say the name of the person with the positive affiliation that's like 90% of it. And you don't have to know what their platform is on everything. Just you know, you can always say, I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think I've ever gotten a question that was that specific. It was just more like, oh, you're a teacher and you're concerned about schools having enough funding. Well, guess what? Representative Everett is all about that and so concerned about that too. And he really shares your concern, and I'll tell him that that's worrying you. And that's pretty much as deep as it goes usually. So it does not take a PhD to know.
Right.
One last thing, just a little thing, and that is, sometimes it's really hard to go out because it's terribly cold or it's really hot or it's raining. That's the best time to go out because people see you standing on the door and they say, oh, come in and we'll have a cup of coffee. They feel so you must really care about what you're doing. Otherwise you wouldn't be out here in this god awful weather. So Even if it's raining, even if it's hot, do it.
Thank you, Claudia.
Yeah,
Um,
and someone asked, just if you don't mind, Becca, someone asked a few minutes ago about on the same theme of not needing to know everything. Someone was worried, what if people ask about the baby formula situation or the price of gas or
Your
something?
sound is coming good.
I think I
Oh,
saw the
sorry.
question though.
Yeah, you want to answer that then, that because we don't,
Yeah.
we're not obligated to answer questions like that.
Right. Well, but the other thing I think I would say, I would just, express sympathy. These are very, very difficult and trying times. But these things are happening internationally.
Yes.
Everyone is dealing with supply chain issues and inflation. This is not something that one administration has done here. This is a result of a pandemic in an economy where there are huge conglomerates that we've allowed to develop, in some basic areas like infant health formula, we're realizing now. So I think, we could point to, and, this is all stuff that's like just, in the news and on NPR, but, the Biden administration is acting on that. He's activated the Defense Production Act, buying supplies from Europe, trying very hard. And I think most people do understand that Democrats care more about people, so you can kind of surf that wave because, the Biden administration is doing these things. I mean, think of it. The Republicans didn't even have a platform in 2020. They have none now. All they have is this crazy Rick Scott stuff. So, another thing that I've learned from people who do a lot of messaging is also just to find ways to lead with our values, because so many people, that overwhelming majority of people do share whatever the battles that go on and that get agitated by donors, particularly on the right. Most of us do believe in fairness. We do believe in transparency. We do want our children to have honest education so they're equipped to go out into the a challenging world and make good decisions. So I think if you ever feel like you're stumbling, on the policy issues, speak from the heart, and speak from your values about, who you are and why you're doing this and why you think it's important. And, that can really open a bridge to others.
I know there's a lot of questions from the audience, and we actually have plenty of time for audience questions, which is great. And before we do that, because this group is about taking action, we're going to pause for a minute to tell you what our opportunities are to jump in and actually ask you to, and not you, Nancy, everybody, to sign up right now to talk to voters in the key districts. So Susan's going to put up a slide of what's happening over the course of the next month. And so just a quick go through it, you can help Sydney Batch on Saturday at a campus in Fuquay Arena or in a phone bank next Monday evening. And just a note about that district, Sydney Batch's district, most of it overlaps with the Congressional District 13, the one that Wiley Nickel just won the primary for, and that is the only contested congressional race in the state. So working for her will drive turnout up the ballot for Wiley Nickel for Congress. And what we've learned is that the idea that turning out at the top drives turnout down the ballot does not hold, because people drop off when they don't know the names of those down ballot candidates. But the reverse is true, that if we canvass for the people
Yes.
lower down on the ballot, that we're turning out for Sherry Beasley and the judges, and in that district congressional. You can help Representative Terrence Everett at a phone bank on June 2nd, and also on foot on June 18th in Wake Forest. And that canvas also supports Mary Wills Bodie, as Susan talked about before. On June 4th, you can help Ricky Hurtado with a canvas in Mebane. And on June 11, we have a special canvas in Siler City, that's in Chatham County, with Representative Robert Reeves. He is our Democratic leader in the State House, and his district, which includes Chatham and in the new maps, a little bit of Randolph, did get quite a bit harder to win. And so we really hope you can join us for that canvas and we can make it a big one. If you're new to all this, we encourage you to commit to one action, either phone banking or canvassing. And if you've done this before, we encourage you to pick 2 per month. If you can canvass for these candidates, please make that your priority. We have less than 6 months to talk to a lot of people. So please go to Neighbors on Call right now to sign up. We're going to have a 3-minute timer. Or go ahead and do it. You got 3 minutes. And if you finish with that, you can stick your questions in the chat because we'll go to Q&A right after. Go to neighborsoncall.org. It'll take you to it'll take you out to another page where you can do the RSVP links. And so here's your 3-minute countdown.
That's so great. May I say that I also love your purple Converse symbols and the purple phone. I don't think you had those the last time I was with you, and I love them.
We've
Becca
progressed.
and I bought a pair. We both have shoes like that now.
That's great. I have black ones. I might have to get another pair.
I think you might have to get purple. So we know this is awkward, but it works. That's why we ask people to do this during the program, because you know we're serious and we know you're serious, and we all are we're going to do this together. No one is out there by themselves trying to make this change. Oh, and good job. She's got her purple Converse too. And
You know,
I
think, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, you know, when you were pointing out that Ricky Hurtado won by less than 500 votes, and we also know that some amazing candidates, including Sherry Beasley, who was running statewide, lost by less than that, by I think it was like 401 votes or something, because there were votes left on the table. So I just want to underscore the brilliant strategic sense of the approach that you follow in Neighbors on Call to focus on those down ballot races, and use them, you know, as you were saying, in some places to drive the turnout up ballot. But there's, you know, almost no one who's going to leave a presidential or a Senate or US Senate or a US congressional race unchecked, but they will oftentimes leave lower, you know, ballot races lower on the ballot. And that's how we got into this mess. And so we really have to make sure that people are working in these state legislative races and turning the General Assembly around.
Yeah, and I mean, we know that we have so little margin, you know, as Susan said before, 2 state Senate seats, and Republicans would get the supermajority back in that chamber, 3 House seats, they'd get it back in the House. So like just a small number of us could actually affect, such a huge outcome. When you think about the difference between 2018, where the governor's veto meant nothing, and then all the vetoes that Governor Cooper has made, and then we've been able to sustain. We're not making forward progress, but at least we're holding steady and preventing the worst stuff. So
and think about how important that was with COVID, the difference between living in North Carolina under Governor Cooper versus Florida, you know, or Alabama or Arkansas or any of these other states that had, you know, crazy Republicans in charge. You know, lives were lost, tens of thousands, you know, hundreds of that, 300,000 people lost who lost their lives after the vaccine came out, who shouldn't have died. And many of those were in states run by Republican governors who were against taking elementary public health measures. So this is really, really so important.
The 3 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll do the math on how many folks signed up, and we will send you that link again tomorrow in case you need more time to look at your calendar and make a plan. So thank you so much for that.
I just want to make sure that Nancy sees our shoes.
She had to show them off. I'm now going to pass.
Oh wait, I got to get back to you. Sometimes I like to scroll through it. Oh, those are wonderful.
I'm going to pass it to Susan Lindsay. She is the Neighbors on Call campaign liaison and manages all our campuses and phone bank actions. So super busy, and she is handling the Q&A. So Susan Lindsay, I'm passing it to you. Oh, we may need to make Susan a co-host.
Trace, Sanji.
Susan Lindsay is a co-host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's, in addition to our legislative races, we've got a big election here for the Supreme Court, and people are asking, what can we do to ensure that we get Democrats elected to the North Carolina Supreme Court? Is NOC thinking about that too?
I think that's hugely important. I'd love to have one of you from Neighbors on Call talk about that and talk about what you're doing about those races.
Well, So we are going to be focusing, we have a very narrow focus, and that's been part of our success is we have a lane and we stick to it. And that is state legislative races. We do firmly believe that canvassing and phone banking in those key races where you're just hitting like a really small segment of voters, that those key voters will then vote up the ballot and get those top of the ticket races. We hope that there's some coordination in the fall about that among the candidates, and that we're able to hand out literature for the judges while we're out there for those candidates, but it would still be on the campaign trail for those state legislative candidates. So that's, we're not doing all the things, but will certainly be impacting those races.
Great.
Right. There was a lot of coordination like that in the 2018 legislative races, and it worked really well. So I feel really hopeful about the idea that we'll be able to achieve coordination about mentioning the importance of the judges. So, okay.
I think also, I mean, we are focused on state legislative races here, but I think having Sherry Beasley, at the top of the ticket as such an inspiring presence who has done so well, statewide in the past, I think that will be really, really inspiring to so many voters.
We have another question that Isabel asked. She would love to hear Nancy's take on where she sees our most optimistic opportunities are in North Carolina.
Golly, I would love to hear your take on that, actually, Isabella. I think you may have your fingers on the pulse even more than I do, because one thing that's happened since my book came out is I'm doing a lot of national stuff, and even still over Zoom. So I feel like I don't have my fingers on the pulse as well as some of you do. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see that as, we could invite other people also to chime in with their ideas about where the most exciting prospects are.
I'm not sure if the question was intended to be strictly which candidates, or I wasn't quite sure how to interpret the question. So I think the candidates we have picked are the ones that we, as Isabel would know, are the ones that are close calls and are important to keep.
So we also have a question. How do we say or explain that the GOP and their backers are pursuing a radical agenda that would diminish our freedoms and eliminate protections and services in a way that doesn't sound like we are radical for saying that?
I think maybe, you can speak from the heart and use the I voice, particularly if you're at the doors, which is already a little bit more personal, but you can say, I'm out here because I'm really concerned, that one of our major parties, is doing things that I never imagined that they would do. And you could list then the things that really strike you the most and that you think will resonate with the people that you're talking with. But certainly, the fact that so many Republican elected officials supported the big lie, continued to try to deny the certification of the election to President Biden, even after they had been cleared out by a violent mob. I mean, that is just astonishing, that they're continuing to push voter suppression in all these states, to try to ban books in schools and, tell teachers how they must, what they must do. I mean, each of us are going to have different things that really we feel passionate about. And I think, speaking in your own voice about what has alarmed you as you've watched this deterioration into extremism, that can be helpful. I do think, and I have heard this from people who do messaging, that it's important not to say all Republicans, that it's very effective to talk about the faction in the Republican Party that's become dominant, this, MAGA faction, or, the Trump faction, that led a lot of people to turn out to vote from fear and anger in 2020, and can do so again. So, we do want to have off ramps, as some people say, for those Republicans who might be pulled, to their party, but are themselves, having trouble stomaching what they're seeing. So I do think the I language and speaking from values and personal observation could be helpful here.
I want to point back to something you said earlier too, which is to listen to the other person and sympathize with their frustration, with their situation. And because I know sometimes in canvassing, when somebody's in a really tough situation and you're talking to them, you can say, I will let Ricky know about this. I will take this back to them. So I just thought that has been a really effective thing, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And also, so many of the concerns that people have at the state level are everyday life things that involve the legislature. So one of the times that I volunteered with you was during the pandemic, and it was for Sydney Batch, and she said that, and I think Isabel said in training people for canvassing that, people were just going through hell, right? I mean, nobody knew what was going on. People were isolated, feeling so bad. And so just to know that a legislator might care about them, or that you would be pushing forward their message about whatever their particular concern was related to the situation that she might be able to do something about, that really mattered to people. And I think, we have to remember there's been 60 years of really hostile anti-government messaging, so the more that we can help people understand, like, we are, we are the people who make the government, and these representatives that we elect, the good ones, want to do the right thing, want to help their constituents. So finding ways to convey that message, I think, can take a little bit of the stress out of people's lives, so they don't feel like they're on their own, and they're in it and alone, and nobody has their backs, but they realize, we are in this together and other people care.
This is actually a NOC question. It's how does NOC handle out-of-state people and groups that might be able to come to or call into North Carolina for canvassing and phone banking? And I know Andrea Vizzoso is on this call, and if we could make her a co-host, I think she'd be a terrific person to answer that question.
She should be able to unmute.
Andrea.
Hey, I just am so excited. I think there are bunches of people here tonight who can talk about this too, but we have an out-of-state chapter. And if you have anyone in your family or friends who are out of state who'd like to, I'd love people to get in touch with me, or friend Grigsby, who couldn't be here tonight. The two of us kind of keep in touch with people from around the country. We have more than 100 people who volunteer to phone bank primarily. Some of them would like to come and canvass at some point too, or have in the past come to canvass. And it's really cool. There's a big organization in Massachusetts, for example, that is following some of the states like ours, that is a purple state. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also see, I don't know if the hosts can see, but I see some hands up, Diane Robertson and Jennifer Bremer.
Go ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
first of all, it's just so, I can't ever say this enough, that NOC, and I've been around a lot of organizing groups, is the best and most effective grassroots organizing group that I have been able to work with. But the thing I wanted to say about this work is, they started canvassing for Ricky Hurtado before the pandemic. And I was on those canvasses, and we logged a lot of hours before the shutdown. And that, I believe, is up 400 votes that he won by. People had name ID, they understood who he was. So when we went back to call them during the pandemic and say, Ricky wants to know if you have had any problems getting supplies, or what do you need from so-and-so. And we got specific things. I couldn't get into Walmart. And we got his phone number and we gave it to them. And so that was such a good example of how that canvassing, phone banking, and recognition of the candidate's interest in them made the difference in that win. It was the most empirical example of that I have experienced. And then, I do think that it's important to do the down ballot, But I think unless people have an ID with that, and I put in the chat, if Neighbors on Call can just stretch a little out of their lane and put those judges lit when they do the lit drop, that will make a huge difference. They may know who the senator is, but I assure you they do not know who the judges are. And if you can just at least put that there in front of them while you're doing the down ballot, I think that can make a huge difference. It's a wasted lit drop if you don't.
We fully agree, Diane, and I will say that part of our role is to advocate for volunteers and say, like, this is, we need people to keep coming back. And so this is what volunteers are saying. So we appreciate getting those messages from volunteers.
I signed up.
Right, and I hear you saying it, and I'm saying to our general audience here, you can always email us and say what you're thinking. That's helpful to us.
Keep up the good work. And Nancy, it's always great to have you, your inspiration. If you haven't seen Nancy take on Bill Maher, you have to do it. Go back.
It was all I could do not to leap over that table and throttle him.
Go back and find them on YouTube.
To the dark side with COVID.
How to do that.
So Isabel wrote back and said, are there specific races in North Carolina that you know about that you think are in the state legislature that are opportunities?
But I think
I'm going to add a PS to that, which is, sort of my subtext question is, I know, Nancy, that you're a dark money expert, and there's been some talk in this primary about dark money in North Carolina and what your take is, to the extent that you have one, about the role of dark money in this state.
The role of dark money in this state has been enormous in the transformation that began with the Project Red Map in 2010 and accelerated thereafter. I mean, one of the most recent documentations of the impact of that was the report issued by the North Carolina AAUP, Association of American University Professors, on political influence in the University of North Carolina system, where, many people on this call, I'm sure, attended, Carolina institutions or have kids, who have gone there or are aspiring to go there. And it's a tragedy. I mean, these are institutions that had long served the state that are being really, really transformed and deformed and devastated by that political influence. So I guess I have that top of mind now more than some of the statewide races. But in Durham, many of you will know that we just had a stealth slate of really extreme Republicans running for the school board while hiding how extreme they were and that they were Republicans in an overwhelmingly Democratic community. But some of them were, one of them wanted, was against the teaching of evolution, they kind of went on from there. So really, really alarming stuff to imagine folks like that, running your local school board. So we do really need to be attentive to what's going on there. I will say, if people don't get these posts, Facing South is a great, information source from the Institute for Southern Studies. There are also national lists, like Jed Legum runs something called Popular Information that charts political money, corporate money going to candidates who are doing these awful things, like January 6th supporters or the anti-abortion elected officials in different states. So there are many ways to get informed on these things, and I agree that people do really need to look out for that. And Policy Watch, yes.
There is a question about replacement theory, which is being sold these days by right-wing Republicans, and some people are suggesting that this is a Jewish plot. How much do you think anti-Semitism is tied into this line of thinking?
whenever you get really extreme racism, there's always anti-Semitism, extreme racism against African Americans or against immigrants or whatever. There's always anti-Semitism, in my experience as a scholar and an observer, anti-Semitism mixed in with it. And also a kind of, Claudia actually wrote a book on mothers in the fatherland, on women, the role of women and gender in the making of the Nazi movement, that you could look at for this. But there's always that element of gender conservatism, of a notion of, strictly demarcated roles for men and women, and all go together. But the other thing I'd say about the Great Replacement theory, and I've been surprised listening to this, to even hear some experts failing to fill in the last part of the blank, because it's not only saying, because there is a demographic reality that our country is going to be one of, is a multiracial democracy that we're trying to hold on to and restore. It's going to be the first Western nation that is likely to become majority minority. So there's like a simple, like a demographic, development or trend there. But what the right has done is to take that and then turn it into a threat and a conspiracy to say that it is Democrats or Jews or, powerful elites who are doing this intentionally. And then if you listen to Tucker Carlson and other people who spew this, they say that they are purposely bringing in these immigrants who will be more obedient, is the language I've heard again and again. And I have to tell you, my first book was about the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. Yeah. And that's exactly what they said. African Americans could vote in so few places and didn't have the numbers. So they were focused on immigrants and Catholics. And that is exactly what they said, that these Catholics are slavishly devoted to the Pope. They'll do anything the Pope says. They shouldn't be in our country. These Italians and these Jews and these Poles, they're so obedient. So this is just recycling really old, really ugly, racist, nativist stuff of the extreme right. And the thing that I think that we need to be aware of too is the extra step that they all take is to turn the people they are attacking into threats. Right? So that innocent people become threats, and you are licensed to be aggressive toward them or these people that you're told, are bringing them in to hurt you because there's a threat to you. And so that, I think that's really important to understand at a gut level, because actually most people are pretty decent. You can't make people hate other people and commit aggression on them unless you make them believe that they are victims and that those other people are hurting them and are a threat to their families. So I think, Becca, you asked before what ordinary people, what we can all do when, to be engaged as citizens in all this. And that's another thing, I think, any conversation where you see this kind of thing rear its head, or the notion that the targets are somehow the aggressors, that's a thing to say. Or when, again, the evening news doesn't really say what's important about this, that's important, because we see where these ideas lead. I mean, an 18-year-old, an 18-year-old committing mass murder. Like how did we get to this point? And, we need to really come to terms with that.
Nancy, thank you. And we want to be very respectful of your time and everyone's time, and we do try to end right on time. I know Jennifer Bremer had her hand up for a long time. You want to try to squeeze it in, Jennifer?
Yeah, I was just going to say on an extremely practical note, so you might want to end on a different note, it would be really helpful on the doors to have little anecdotes that the candidates would be forced to give us with regard to what they've done for constituent service. Like they helped somebody who didn't have this or that. Having 4 or 5 of those, depending on what the people's issues were, would be really helpful.
Jennifer, I'm so glad you got the last word. That seems like an incredibly important suggestion and just what we need. Well, I'm hearing a lot of energy in this discussion. So it's really, really exciting. I have great confidence for these races. And yeah, I think we need the t-shirts to go with our purple sneakers.
Always the t-shirts. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for being here with us and helping us get energized and motivated. And thank you to everyone in the audience, because this is a group of people who is really working hard with us, with other groups on their own. Everyone's really doing a lot, and we really do take a lot of hope from all of us working together. So thank you for that. We will be following up tomorrow with an email. And on every Monday, you will get the Neighbors on Call email. So please look for that, because it has all of our actions and events in it. And Nancy, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank
And we
you.
look forward to seeing you soon.
It's always
Yes,
a
thanks
pleasure
so
to be
much.
with you. I'm inspired by you, and I tell people in other states about you and how they have to build something like you've built here. So keep up the great work.